The ship had been at sea for many days when it came at last within sight of the island, a long grey shoulder of rock rising from the water with little to recommend it but its remoteness from Rome. The man on board was 44 years of age, a senator, a writer of some renown, and he had been accused of adultery with the emperor's niece on what may well have been a fabricated charge. He carried with him no library worth the name, no household of any size, no certainty that he would ever set foot again upon the Italian peninsula. What he carried instead was a question, and the question was this: whether the place to which a man is sent can, by itself, make him miserable, whether geography has that power, whether the soil of Corsica, being neither Roman nor cultivated nor warm with the company of his friends, contained within itself some quality of suffering that would now enter him through the soles of his feet and remain there until he died. He suspected it did not. He was about to spend 8 years finding out. His name was Lucius Annaeus Seneca, and in the year 41 of our common reckoning, the Emperor Claudius signed the order that sent him into exile. From that exile, he wrote a letter to his mother, Helvia, that has come down to us across 2,000 years. It is one of the strangest letters ever written by a son to a grieving parent, because its purpose is not to be comforted, but to comfort. He writes to tell her that she should not weep for him. He writes to tell her that he is not, in fact, suffering. You will want to know whether he was telling the truth. The principle Seneca is working out in the Consolation to Helvia, and which he returns to in the letters of his later years, is one of the oldest convictions of the Stoic school. It is this: that place is not the cause of suffering, that the soil beneath a man, the walls around him, the climate above him, the distance separating him from those he loves, none of these by their own nature wound him. The wound, if there is a wound, is administered by his own opinion of the place, by the judgment he passes upon it, by the story he tells himself about what it means to be where he is. The Greeks had a word for the faculty that does this telling. They called it the hegemonikon, the ruling part of the soul, and the Stoics held that this faculty alone was the seat of human good and ill. Epictetus, who came after Seneca and who had himself been a slave, would put the matter as starkly as it can be put. It is not the things themselves that disturb men, but their judgments about these things. The doctrine is the same in Seneca's hand, though his temper is gentler and his prose more elaborate. He does not bark the principle at you. He coaxes it out, paragraph by paragraph, until you find that you have agreed with him almost without noticing. Listen to how he begins the relevant passage in the letter to his mother. The translation is the older one, somewhat formal, but it preserves the shape of his thought. He writes, "All places, if the mind be sound, are alike to a wise man, for it is not the place that gives virtue, but virtue that adorns the place." The construction is precise. The place does not give. The virtue adorns. The flow of significance moves outward from the soul into the world, not inward from the world into the soul. A man who has cultivated his inner life carries with him, wherever he goes, the conditions of his own contentment, because those conditions were never located outside him to begin with. This is harder than it sounds. It is harder than it sounds because we are accustomed to think of suffering as something done to us by circumstance. We were happy in the old house and unhappy in the new one. We were at ease in the company of certain friends and ill at ease without them. We slept well in our own bed and badly in another. From these observations, it is natural and almost automatic to draw the conclusion that the bed and the friends and the house were the causes of the feelings we had in their presence. Seneca asks you to pause before drawing that conclusion. He asks you to notice that another man, placed in the same bed, the same house, the same absence of those particular friends, might feel something altogether different. And if the place produced the feeling by its own force, this could not be so. The place would produce the same feeling in every soul that encountered it, as fire produces heat in every hand that touches it, but it does not. Therefore, the feeling is not produced by the place alone. Something is added by the soul, and whatever is added by the soul can, in principle, be subtracted by the soul. That is the principle. Place is not the cause of suffering. The cause is the judgment passed upon the place. And because the judgment belongs to you, the suffering, in the deepest sense, also belongs to you. Which means, and here Seneca turns the proposition into something almost luminous, that the remedy also belongs to you. To understand why this principle mattered to him, and not merely as an abstraction, you must understand the circumstance into which he had been thrown. Corsica, in the 1st century of our era, was not the Corsica of later travel writing. It was rocky, malarial in its lowlands, sparsely populated, and known chiefly to the Romans as a place to send those they wished to forget. The interior was mountainous, and the inhabitants were considered, by the standards of imperial condescension, barbaric. The Latin Seneca was accustomed to hearing in the forum, and the salons was scarcely spoken. The food was poor. The wine, when there was wine, was thin. The weather alternated between a punishing summer and a damp, raw winter that came off the Tyrrhenian Sea and settled into the bones of a man already past his youth. Seneca had been, before his exile, a figure of standing in the city. He had been born in Cordoba, in the Roman province of Hispania, into the family of the elder Seneca, a rhetorician of some accomplishment. He had been brought to Rome as a young man, trained in philosophy and oratory, and had begun to rise through the ranks of public service. His prose was already admired. His health, never robust, had given him trouble from his earliest years, and he had spent a long convalescence in Egypt under the care of relatives. He had survived the reign of Caligula, who had reportedly considered putting him to death on account of his eloquence, and had been dissuaded only by someone's remark that Seneca was sickly and would not live long anyway. The remark, intended cruelly, had saved his life. Then came Claudius, and with Claudius came Messalina, the emperor's wife, and the intrigues of the court, and the accusation, almost certainly false, that linked Seneca to Julia Livilla, the sister of the late Emperor Caligula. The exact truth has not survived. What has survived is the sentence: banishment, confiscation in part of his property, removal from the Senate, departure for Corsica with whatever he could carry. He arrived to find no philosophical academy waiting for him, no circle of companions, no public office in which to spend his days. The man who had filled his hours in Rome with the dense, exhausting business of a senator and a writer was now confronted with the one resource he had not previously had in any quantity: time. Empty time. Time that did not arrange itself around appointments. Time in which nothing happened and from which nothing was expected. It is at this point, and not before, that the Stoic principle ceases to be an exercise in the classroom and becomes a question of survival. We know from his own writings and from the brief biographical notices that have come down through Tacitus and others what the texture of his exile was like. He read, he wrote, he studied the natural world around him. He sent letters back to Rome, some of which have been lost and some of which we still possess. The Consolation to Helvia is one. The Consolation to Polybius, addressed to a freedman of the emperor, is another, and this latter is a more uncomfortable document, for in it Seneca seems to flatter Claudius in a manner that has caused readers in every century since to wince on his behalf. He wanted, of course, to come home. He did not pretend otherwise. The principle that place is not the cause of suffering does not require a man to be indifferent to the prospect of returning to his own city. It requires only that he not be destroyed by the fact of being kept from it. In the letter to his mother, Seneca lays out his daily practice with a directness that is rare in his works. He says, in effect, I read, I study, I observe the heavens, which are the same here as they are at Rome, the same constellations in the same configurations, the moon waxing and waning by the same law. He notes that nature has placed within reach of every man the things needful for life: water, food sufficient for sustenance, shelter from the weather. The luxuries that Rome had taught him to consider necessities turn out, on inspection, to have been ornaments rather than supports. A man can live without them. He may not live as gracefully, and he may not live as comfortably, but he can live, and he can think, and he can write. Here is a passage from that letter, which I will quote at some length because the cadence matters. Seneca writes, "Wherever we betake ourselves, two most excellent things will accompany us: universal nature and our own virtue. This, believe me, was the design of the great creator of the universe, whoever he may be, whether an all-powerful God or incorporeal reason contriving great works, or divine spirit pervading all things from the smallest to the greatest with equal energy, or fate and an unalterable sequence of causes clinging one to the other. This, I say, was his design, that only the most worthless of our possessions should fall under the control of another." Notice what he is doing. He is identifying what cannot be taken from him by exile. The sky cannot be taken. The mind cannot be taken. The capacity to reason, to read, to write, to live according to his judgment of what is fine and what is base cannot be taken. These remain, and these, he argues, were always the goods that mattered. The villa at Rome, the senatorial robes, the access to the great houses, these were ornaments. They were pleasant. He does not deny that they were pleasant, but they were not the substance of his life. The substance of his life was internal, and the internal had traveled with him to Corsica, intact, undamaged by the voyage. There is a moment in the letter that I find particularly striking, and I want to draw your attention to it. Seneca anticipates an objection. Someone will say, "But you, Seneca, are a philosopher. You have resources of mind that ordinary men do not have. The principle may work for you and not for the rest of us." He answers this objection by pointing out that the resources of mind are available to anyone willing to cultivate them. The exile does not bestow philosophy upon a man. The philosophy must have been there before, or be capable of being acquired now. But there is no special endowment. no rare gift required. There is only the willingness to turn the attention inward and to inspect the judgments one has been making. He also does something that I think a lesser writer would not have done. He admits in passing that he misses his mother. He admits that he wishes he could be with her. He does not pretend to a serenity he does not feel. The principle, properly understood, does not require the cessation of all preference. He prefers to be in Rome. He prefers the company of his family. What the principle requires is that this preference not be allowed to become a tyranny, that the absence of the preferred thing not be treated as a catastrophe, that life continue with its work and its reading and its observation of the stars, even when the preferred things are absent. We do not know exactly how he passed each day. We can infer. We know he composed treatises on natural philosophy during this period, examining questions about the physical world, and these treatises, or fragments of them, became material for the Naturalis Questiones he would write much later. We know he kept up his Greek, since his quotations from Greek sources remained fluent throughout his later works. We know he wrote letters that, even in their preserved form, show a man whose intellectual life had not contracted, but if anything, had deepened in the absence of distraction. 8 years passed in this manner. 8 years is not a short time. It is the better part of a decade. A man begins his exile at one age and ends it at another, and the body, particularly a body that was never strong, accumulates the wear of those years. When the recall came, in the year 49, it came not because Claudius had repented of the original sentence, but because Agrippina, the emperor's new wife, wanted a tutor for her son Nero. Seneca was brought home to teach the boy, who would, in time, order his death. The principle had carried him through, not without preference, not without longing, not without the moments of weakness that he himself acknowledges in the letters, but it had carried him through. He had not been destroyed by Corsica. The place had not produced in him the suffering that Rome had assumed it would. He had arrived as a man, and he had remained a man, and he had used the time given him to think. Now we may ask what the principle is teaching, structurally, beneath its particular application to exile. The teaching, when stated plainly, is this: a great deal of human suffering arises not from events themselves, but from the meanings we assign to events. We do not suffer the bare fact. We suffer the interpretation. And because the interpretation is added by us, the interpretation is, at least in principle, within our power to revise. This does not mean, and Seneca is careful never to claim it means, that all suffering is illusory or that genuine misfortunes do not occur. He has been exiled. The exile is real. He is not on Corsica in some metaphorical sense. He is on Corsica in the literal, geographical sense, and he cannot leave. What he denies is that the geography itself contains the misery. The geography is neutral. The misery, where it appears, is added by a mind that has decided that to be away from Rome is intolerable, that to be deprived of certain comforts is unbearable, that to be cut off from one's accustomed life is the end of all life worth living. These decisions are made by the mind. Other minds, placed in the same situation, would make different decisions and would experience different feelings. Therefore, the feelings are not in the situation. They are in the mind that interprets the situation. From this follows a practical instruction. When you find yourself suffering on account of where you are, or on account of what you have been deprived of, do not begin by trying to change the place or to recover the loss. Begin by examining the judgment. Ask yourself what you have been telling yourself about this place, about this loss. Ask whether the telling is accurate. Ask whether another man of different formation might tell himself a different story and feel a different feeling. And if the answer is yes, then you have located the source of your suffering, and you have located it in a place where you have some power to intervene. This is not a quick remedy. Seneca does not pretend that it is. The judgments we make about our circumstances have often been formed over many years, reinforced by habit, supported by the opinions of those around us. To revise them takes patience and a willingness to sit with the question rather than to demand an immediate answer. But the patience is itself a kind of practice, and the practice itself is a kind of life. A man who is in the middle of revising his judgments is a man who is awake. He is not merely being carried along by his reactions. He is examining them. He is meeting them. He is asking whether they deserve the authority he has been giving them. There is a further teaching, somewhat quieter than the first, which I think Seneca's Exile reveals to us. It is this: the goods that travel with us are the only goods we truly possess. Whatever can be taken from us by an emperor's signature, or by a voyage to an island, or by the turning of fortune in a single afternoon, was never wholly ours to begin with. We had the use of it. We had the enjoyment of it. We did not have the ownership of it in any deep sense. The Stoics distinguished sharply between things in our power and things not in our power, and they urged a kind of detachment from the latter that strikes some readers as cold. But the detachment is not coldness. The detachment is accuracy. It is the refusal to lay claim in our hearts to things that the world has only lent us. What does travel with us? Seneca lists the items: the capacity to reason, the sky above, the natural world, which is the same in Corsica as in Rome, the virtues, if we have cultivated them, the memory of those we love, which is not the same as their presence, but is something, the work we are capable of doing with our minds. These are the durable goods. These are what remain when everything else has been stripped away. And a life built upon these, Seneca suggests, is a life that cannot be ruined by any external rearrangement, because the externals were never the load-bearing structure. The principle has a hardness in it that should not be smoothed over. It asks something of you. It asks you to consider that your present unhappiness, if you are unhappy, may not be located where you think it is located. It may not be in the city you wish to leave or the city you wish to return to. It may not be in the job or the house or the absence of the friend. It may be in the way you have been holding those things in your mind. And the way you have been holding them in your mind is something you can examine and revise and slowly change. This is the gift Seneca offers from Corsica. Not the cheerful claim that nothing bad has happened to him, for things had happened to him and they were bad. Rather, the more sober claim that the badness has not been able to reach the part of him that matters. The hegemonicon is intact. The reasoning faculty is intact. The capacity to live, to read, to write, to observe the heavens is intact. He has been moved geographically. He has not been moved in the only sense that for a philosopher counts. Let us close with a question, which is what Seneca himself might have left you with at the end of a letter. Consider the place in which you find yourself this evening. not metaphorically, the actual place, the room or the chair, or the road on which you are walking as you listen to this. Consider how you have been holding this place in your mind. Have you been telling yourself that you would be happier somewhere else? Have you been waiting to be elsewhere before you begin to live the life you mean to live? Have you been treating the present location as a kind of waiting room, a delay between the life you wanted and the life that has so far refused to arrive? If so, ask whether the place is, by itself, the obstacle. Ask whether another person, placed exactly here, in this same room, on this same chair, with this same history behind them and this same uncertainty ahead, might begin to live, might begin to read, might begin to think, might begin to take up the small work of attending to their own judgments. And if another person could, ask why you cannot. Ask what you have been telling yourself about this place that has made it seem uninhabitable. Seneca was on an island he had not chosen, for reasons that were not just, for a duration he could not know in advance. He read, he wrote, he observed the heavens, which were the same heavens that arched over Rome. He sent a letter to his mother, telling her not to weep, and the letter has lasted 2,000 years. The place did not make him. The place did not break him. The place was a place, and he was a man, and the relation between them was something he had to decide. You also have to decide. Be well.